Finn, do you remember?
Yeah, I think so. A long time ago, I was you, sort of. And I crashed on Earth and became a butterfly or some biz. And I guess it was just some random absurd thing. Just a joke I've been playing out for centuries.
Who's creating the joke? Are you? And if so, then are you my creator?
Maybe? I don't know. Probably not.
Probably not, but who knows? I've been around forever and experienced so much impossible junk. I've embodied all that is good and evil. And now we're here. It's unprecedented. And I give you a choice. Come with me to the end and the beginning, or struggle here a while like a beautiful autumn leaf.
You're telling me to abandon all this stuff, but you're not really making it sound bad.
It's not bad. I'm just giving you the choice of a new mode of existence.
I feel like I put a lot of work into this meat reality. I'd like to see it through.
Fair enough. Prepare to discorporate.
I'm sure some of you know that clip is from Adventure Time, where Finn, while talking to the Sophianic Catalyst Comet, makes a choice to not return to the Pleroma and instead remain as a Johnny Cash Bodhisattva in the Kenoma. Adventure Time certainly has a Gnostic groove. My 5 kids love it. Vance and his son love it. I have barely watched it, I admit, because I put most of my energy into taking care of my 5 kids and serving thee here in the desert of the real at Aeon by Gnostic Radio. I have made a choice, and hopefully you have too, in being a Johnny Cash Bodhisattva, rebelling against this mechanistic universe while reminding everyone of that bittersweet song of beauty and remembrance.
And heaven, that desired goal of most people, is within us.
All the gods, all the heavens, all the worlds are within us. They are magnified dreams.
You know the deck is stacked and the cosmic dice is loaded. If death and taxes are the only certainty in life, something is mucho wrong with the fabric of the universe. And this is the universe where they cancel the OA after 2 seasons, where men have nipples, where infinity and beyond didn't work out for Buzz and Woody in the end, and so many other psychic coituses interruptus or spiritual blueballing. Don't call it a circle of life, but the circle jerk of archons.
There's only one hell, Princess. The one we live in now.
As the saying goes, I got 99 problems, and being trapped in a decaying body in a money-hungry society on a dying planet in a mysterious dimension might be one.
People out here, they don't even know the outside world exists. Might as well be living on the fucking moon. There's all kinds of ghettos in the world. It's all one ghetto, man. Giant gutter in outer space.
We're solving all those problems, you see, because again, we have made the choice like Finn to bring a greater meaning to the universe. An ultimate orgasm of kindness and love. We are divine and we are human, where the falling angel meets the rising ape. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else to take down those armies of archons, egregores, and alien robots named Pandora.
You shall not pass!
We're solving those problems by being a Johnny Cash Bodhisattva, existentialists in our Christendom, and always giving the finger to the creator gods, as well as giving the finger to that idiot telling us about looking at the finger of the guy pointing at the moon. We get it.
Patience, my son. To summon your power for the conflict to come, you must first have power over that which conflicts you.
Okay, am I the only one who finds these sayings just a little bit formulaic? If you want to push something down, you have to pull it up. If you want to go left, you have to go right.
Your temper is very quick, my friend. But until you learn to master your rage...
Your rage will become your master? That's what you were going to say, right? Right?
One red pill suppository for all of this, as I, your host Miguel Connor, have taught you, is in the ancient Gnostic texts that are so relevant in this Philip K. Dick world. Those writings crackling with a sci-fi sensibility of alien gods and universes made of light. Why is that? As William T. Vollmann wrote in the New York Times, as a corpus, the Gnostic scriptures are nearly incoherent, like a crowd of sages, mystics, and madmen all speaking at once. But always they call upon us to know ourselves. And as Carl Jung said, the greatest honor in life is to finally meet your authentic self.
As Hemingway said, there is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self.
Thus and thusly, we have the pleasure of being joined again by James Brantingham, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss his new book, Truth, What is Truth? Holy Wisdom and the Logos of God, the 4 lost Apocryphal Christian Gospels, and the secret revelation of John. In our last interview, James discussed the Gospel of Philip. Now he'll share with us about the Valentinian Gospel of Truth, the Sethian secret book of Juan, and the Stoic Gnostic Gospel of Mary, including their theology, history, and cultures that gave them birth. With these texts, you'll know yourself more at the end of the interview. Get closer to your authentic self. I recommend you also listen to past shows on these works or get my books, Voices of Gnosticism and Other Voices of Gnosticism, where lauded historians and the very translators of the Nag Hammadi library lay it down concerning the Gnostikoi.
It is said that the future is always born in pain. The history of war is the history of pain. If we are wise, what is born of that pain matures into the promise of a better world, because we learn that we can no longer afford the mistakes of the past.
And to really understand the ethos of these texts, specifically the secret book of Juan, let me quote the great Robert Price now. The goal of Gnostic salvation, this is a mythology. It is a story of how things came to be the way they are. A story that sets the pattern for everything forever. Or as this myth has it, until forever is over. The ultimate goal of humanity is to come to understand this myth, the Gospel of the secret book of John, in such a way that the pattern of devolution from the fullness of God to humanity's imprisonment in matter is reversed. To understand the events of our fall reveals to us a map for our journey of ascent. We will emerge free from matter, rise above Yaldabaoth and his demons, return to an established position in the mind of God, and never leave again. The mistake of Sophia will be resolved, and wisdom will be fully restored to God. The mind of God will be fully sane and healed. The Gnostic myth is a tale of the growth of God's mental disintegration.
I'm not really your wife. You're not really my husband. On some level, it's all pretend. How many versions were there?
90. This is the last one.
Wow.
I've destroyed billions of people with a thought. And you'd like to think that it's painless?
The myth reaches its most unhappy form when the Godhead has not only forgotten who God is, but does not even know that God truly exists and begins to worship the artificial deity Yaldabaoth as creator of an external world. In the depths of God's fall, the Godhead believes itself to be human and worships Yaldabaoth as the god of the Hebrew Babel. When the Godhead ceases to know itself, God seems to be human and falls into the multiple personalities we know as human beings. Humankind has fallen God. The goal of Gnostic salvation, then, is to bring self-awareness back to God, which means that divine self-knowledge is the religious goal of human life.
If the body shells the soul, and the soul is divine ground, then God is earth, God is us, God is all around.
I'd also like to read an old quote from Brother Spark on Gnostic dualism and world hating, because I feel it also gives perspective to the Gnostic corpus as a whole and dispels a lot of misunderstandings still happening today. Here it is. Does dualism mean, quote, hating nature? No, it does not. It expresses the vast gulf between the kenoma and the pleroma. As beautiful as any material thing is to us, it is but a dim reflection of truer, more real spiritual objects in the pleroma. Yes, bunnies are adorable. Gnostic dualism isn't saying they aren't. It is saying that a pleromatic bunny is so fucking cute it would explode your face, a la Raiders of the Lost Ark. The idea that nature is somehow a direct extension of God is fundamentally opposed to the very heart of Gnosticism. It is indeed an idea that makes the holder not a Gnostic. It is also, I think this is obvious, a nauseatingly bourgeoisie and spoiled modern take on nature, since it is only in the tame bourgeoisie paradises of civilization that, quote, nature is a part of God makes any sense at all. In most parts of the world, and for most of history, nature is a vicious bitch.
Mother Nature is a serial killer. No one's better, more creative. Like all serial killers, she can't help the urge to want to get caught.
If nature is God and our pain and suffering is really our failure to recognize that nature is God, like the neo-Gnostic says, then the neo-Gnostic realizes God wants to eat babies in their cribs, swim up your urethra and lay eggs in your bladder, and wipe out entire towns full of innocents with volcanoes and tsunamis. This oneness with nature garbage is communing with Yaldabaoth, not God, to a classical Gnostic perspective. Is the spark hidden in nature? Yes, but it is hidden. Nature isn't the spark. Well said, Brother Spark, and well said too, Bob. Now let us to the interview with James Brantingham.
From the Demiurge. Is the Demiurge related to the Overmind?
No, I think the Demiurge is like a negative expression of
that created the universe? How did the Overmind get in there to be running the Earth, at least?
Well, I think of the Overmind as the Logos. You know, it's the understanding and self-existence which permeates everything. And the Demiurge is the force of matter and time and cosmic destiny that is always trying to lock in the Logos and condition it and make it subject to the rules of the physical universe of space and time. And the Logos is like something from, this is all Gnostic theology, by the way. This is just straight from the book. The Logos is trying to struggle through the labyrinth of the material universe to escape, to rejoin the real source of itself, which is outside of matter. Matter is viewed as an entrapment.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined again by James Brantingham. How are you doing, James? Thanks for coming back on the show.
It's a pleasure, Miguel. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure is all ours, and I really enjoyed your newest work, Truth. What is Truth? You were a few years ago, I can't remember when, but your interview on the Gospel of Philip was very interesting, very popular too. There is definitely an interest from many sides on these ancient texts and these new translations. As Hal Tassig said in our show, we need more translations because there's still so many insights to be gleaned from these texts. There's still a lot to be found, and these different translations bring more light into being. So great work, and we're going to get to it. But first, let us say hello to the Moondog, Vance. How you doing, Vance?
Looking forward to a good interview with James.
James, I think we talked about it last time in our interview, but maybe, again, it's been a few years since you graced Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. But how did you get into translating these ancient, almost forgotten texts?
Well, last time we had moved back from England. We had been in England, and I was professor at the University of Surrey in Guildford, England. And when we got back, I took another position at a university here in Los Angeles. And during my lunch break, I had purchased a copy of the Gospel of Philip. And previously I had purchased the Gospel of Thomas, and I read through it, and I kind of liked it, but it didn't pop into my mind to alter or do anything to that book with a pencil. But the Gospel of Philip that I bought, which is a translation from French, I believe, there were times when I just didn't like the way the sentence flowed, and so I would write in some different words, and but I did enjoy reading the Gospel of Philip during my lunch break. I'd be alone and relaxing, and I would take a few moments to recharge by reading a few scriptural lines from the Gospel of Philip and think about them. And as I said, I would sometimes mark in how I felt the sentence might be improved. But it really didn't pop into my mind to jump to the complexity of doing a translation until I came across the work of Thomas Patterson Brown, T.B. Brown, and he's one of those scholars that was with all the group with James Robinson and out there in Pomona, that looked at the big Nag Hammadi cats that they found in the desert. And he did, it's a website he has up now. I think he passed away just a few years ago. He did the Gospel of Philip, and at the end of each one of his verses, so to speak, he'd have a little thing that said, what did it say? Said, I can't remember. It was one of the words, said, like translation or something, but I'd click on it, and then boom, it would take me right to a interlinear translation, word for word, Coptic to English interlinear translation. So none of the niceties were in the translation. It was like going to a Spanish translation and seeing it said car fast, car blue, It didn't say it was a fast car that's blue. So you got just this very rough translation, but the English words were all there, and that fascinated me. I I thought that was really interesting, because I would go back and I'd check and see which word he used for example, Son of Man. He liked to use Son of Man. I like to use Son of Man. Some people today tend to use other terminology like Child of Humanity, and I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying that I have as a preference Son of Man, and so I would. That got me interested. It got me thinking. Well, there are other Coptic to English interlinear translations of just Coptic to English. Boom, 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 and so you get the very rough translation, but you get it kind of as it comes. And if you've got like 3 of those or so, you get a feeling for what's there in the core Coptic, what I call the core Coptic. Then today you have usually at least 3, if not 5, translations that you can go to, see what they've done, and then that gives you also another way to get an insight. It might tell you about the tense of a verb, or you might have to look up a Coptic word here and there and so forth, which I did at times. So I realized that I had enough material, and I had, as many Christian scholars use Greek to English interlinear translations, and many are very dependent on them. Some aren't. They know Greek entirely and so forth. But I was dependent on these type of translations, and then many other translations that had interpreted Coptic to English. And so I thought, well, I'm going to try to see if I can write a Gospel of Philip that I like. And that may sound kind of, I don't know, arrogant. I don't know. It's a thing about me. Whatever I get involved in, I usually want to get behind it and around it and so forth. When I was in music school, getting my degree as a classical guitarist at California State University, Long Beach, the first Bachelor of Music for that, as a guitarist ever, I read my first book on the history of guitar. And I'd never known of the history of guitar prior to that time. So it gives you a little idea of how I got involved in it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sometimes you just, a bug bites you. You know, some people get into model trains or fishing, and very few get into this sort of ancient text. Like there's, James, there's a reoccurring guest. His name is Stephen Hewler. He lives around where you do in Southern California, and he's in the entertainment business. I think he has a company that builds stages or something for movie sets. One day he just read Irenaeus, and he became completely smitten with Marcion. He just became he's a Jewish guy, really? But he just thought, Marcion, I want to understand about Marcion. I want to read what the church fathers said. So you never know what's going to get us, right? Sometimes it just happens. It happens.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And being Jewish and knowing Marcion wanted to get rid of anything that was Jewish in both the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah, but he just found it fascinating. He wanted to go down that rabbit hole and understand what made him tick, what was this church like in those days. From a historical point of view, he just couldn't get enough. So that happened. So why don't we get to your book offers several translations. I'd like you to pick which one do you think we should start for. We agreed to do the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Truth, and the Secret Book of John. Which one would you like to start with, James?
We could start with the Gospel of Truth, and maybe you can help me out a little bit. I've got an enormous amount of information in my head, just exactly what I want to do with it or where I want to go that's another thing.
Yes.
But so the Gospel of Truth.
All right, awesome. That's exactly what I had on my list. I wanted the Gospel of Truth. So before we even get to the Gospel of Truth, where are you today with defining Gnosticism? Can we say Gnosticism, or can we even use the term, or where are you?
Well, that's perfect, because I wanted to say what Gnosticism means for me so that I don't mislead anybody. For me, the term Gnostic means a Gnostic Christian. Now, I do consider myself a Christian. However, I would say this: I am, borrowing a word from Andrew Philip Smith, I'm an esoteric Christian, and so I include in the material I read, the Nag Hammadi Library, Hermetic literature, and that type of thing, along with the canonical Gospels and Old Testament and so forth. So for me, the term Gnostic, I'll just say Gnostic, but what the listener should hear is I really mean Gnostic Christian, generally. Otherwise I'll explain why I don't mean that. And Gnosticism to me means Gnostic Christianity, because Gnostics in late antiquity called themselves Christians. I mean, in 120 A.D. or Common Era, they called themselves Christians. They didn't come up and say, "Hey, I'm a Gnostic Christian," because nobody would have known what they were talking about.
Very true.
What? You know-it-all Christian? But they. And I don't deny. I do feel that Simone Petremont is correct that Gnosticism is dependent. This is my belief. Some don't believe this, but I believe it is dependent on Christianity and built around Christianity. I don't mean though by that to deny that there isn't pre-Christian Jewish Gnosticism, such as Baruch by Justin, or there wasn't Platonic. There's heavy Platonic involvement in Gnosticism, and Egyptian and other sources that predate Gnosticism. I'm not denying them at all, but for me, Gnosticism does not really denote last century's classical theology of Gnosticism with the Demiurge and everything. That doesn't mean I'm going to not talk about the Demiurge or anything like that. But for me, just for me, concretely, Gnostic means, or to study Gnosticism means to study hidden, esoteric, mystical, divine, and salvational knowledge. And these are mostly Christian or Judeo-Christian texts. I don't assert them to be canonical, but for me, they are counterpoint to the Old and New Testaments, and I think that in reading them, you understand that Christianity is probably developed from a broader horizon than what we think it did, and it helps you to understand Judaism and other religions better by becoming aware of Gnosticism. How's that?
Good answer. But of course, things sometimes get complicated. Obviously, the Gospel of Truth is, most scholars agree, is a Valentinian work. Scholars must be agnostic about it being written by Valentinus, since I think the church fathers talk about Valentinus wrote a Gospel of Truth, but we don't even know if this is the same one that they are quoting. But then we get back to the Valentinians, because the Valentinians are definitely esoteric Christian. But some other scholars have said, well, they're kind of not Gnostic. As you know, like Bentley Layton has put, the Gnostics would be more the quote-unquote Sethians with the myth of Sophia and the fall and the Demiurge and this sort of intense drama. And scholars have said the Valentinians basically, they took the Gnostic myth, but they already had their own sort of esoteric form of Christianity, very Platonic, closer to the Church of Rome and so forth. What do you think, James?
Well, I do think that he's, as many of the scholars have described him as the great reformer. Here's a guy that was almost elected Pope, Valentinus. So he couldn't be walking around as he might have been a high bishop or maybe, I don't know if they had cardinals yet at that time, but he was high. He was high in the Christian hierarchy. So he came close to being elected Pope. So most people believe he was at that time teaching Valentinian Gnosticism or Christianity. So I mean, I don't think he would have just brought out the theology of the secret revelation of John and plop it down there in front of somebody and say, what do you think of that? You know, it's because we're going to talk about that, but that I think that takes a little preparation. So, yeah, I think he made an effort to himself. I don't know whether he wrote the Gospel of Truth or not. I think it's a possibility that he wrote it. I've seen the extracts. You know, they have small extracts of Valentinus, and I can't take a full theology from those extracts. So I guess many scholars working on many works that have all sorts of different, have many similarities, have come to the opinion that those core works are Valentinian, and they correlate it with this man who was highly trained in Platonism, and so I do think he tried to make his scripture fit with the Roman Church. In fact, that is part of what I've tried to do with these, with my translations. Maybe it sounds a little bit like a betrayal, but I have purposely tried to make them not really closer to the Roman Church, but closer to a little bit closer to canonical Christianity, and I hope that people read it and enjoy it more, that they can see in it how it derives from many common Christian canonical ideas, but with other ideas too. That is part of why I've written it the way I've written it. For example, I read many scholars' textbooks, where they go on and on about the beauty of the Gospel of Truth. And I would read different translations of the Gospel of Truth. And I wasn't, for whatever reason, it did not strike me as I felt it should. I thought, everybody talks about this. Karen King talks about it. And James Robinson talks about it. And everybody talks about the Gospel of Truth as being extraordinarily beautiful. And I'd read a translation, I think, well, okay, that's all right translation. That's good, but I'm not. It doesn't strike me in the manner that they've described the book. So I decided I'm going to have to write a really beautiful Gospel of Truth and make it profound so that people have the experience that all the other scholars are talking about. I'm kidding. I don't know if I pulled that off or not, but
it's a beautiful translation you did. Yeah. Thank
you. I really worked at it, and so here's what really happened with the Gospel of Truth with me. Once again, Thomas Patterson Brown had written a Gospel of Truth. He had translated Gospel of Truth. And at the end of each one of his verses, he had a little tick. You could tick it, and it would take you to the Coptic. And so I had an interlinear English to Coptic translation that I could look at. And I had a number of other translations of Coptic to English. And then I had many translations of the Gospel of Truth by people like Marvin Meyer and William Barnstone, and which they're excellent works. But then I tried to what really happened, and I know I'm kind of sounding hesitant and everything, but I came across a translation by a Coptic to English interlinear translation by Kendrick Grobel. You ever hear about Kendrick Grobel?
No, I haven't, James.
Oh, Kendrick Grobel. His translation was done in 1961, and I went looking for the book, and sure enough, it was on Amazon, and you could get it, the old 1961 book, and so I purchased it, and it came after a few weeks, and then of course I realized when I came across this one website that somebody, it's incredible to me, but somebody had completely put the entire Kendrick Grobel Gospel of Truth online, and I didn't find it until I had the book, and it wasn't until after I'd read the book, and then I realized I also had it online, which made a lot of work easier. But Kendrick Grobel's translation, what's so strange to me is he just did, you would have the Coptic, and then he would just do the English as he thought it was best translated right then and there. And I found it profoundly beautiful. And so it was, so I was hit with how profoundly beautiful it was for the first time, at least for me. So that is one of the major influences on me, or for me, in going forth and then doing my own Gospel of Truth, and then bringing in some of the terminology I use. I try to freely admit up front so everybody knows I interpolate a little bit from New Testament, Old Testament material. Most people will pick it up. Maybe sometimes somebody will not, but and I interpolate occasionally from another Gnostic text, and I even interpolated a statement by Max Planck because I thought it was so beautiful about a statement he makes about what reality actually is, which we may come to a little bit later, but we come to it pretty soon.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that's going to talk about it, sure.
So that's that was my experience with and I should have gone hunting in the other translations more deeply, because I probably would have found Kendrick Grobel sooner. But Grobel's translation to me was just knocked my socks off, and I want to bring that experience to other people who aren't Gnostics, or who the Gospel of Truth. To me, I do not see what is not Christian about the Gospel of Truth. It just says it in a different way. Now, you could say it might be best to say that it's a Judeo-Christian work, and I don't see what is heretical about it, except possibly it's pretty clear that there's emanation in it, and emanation rather than creation. The word emanation was ruled by the ancient theologians as a heretical way of creating something. Now, I think today, I don't know why I think it has something to do with other Christians, with the idea that God's bubbling you off, and so you're part of God, and yet in their mind you have to be a creature completely separated from God, separated from God. So there may be something to that in the minds of those who think it's heretical, but I don't know why. I mean, emanation doesn't mean pinching off as a bubble or two cells bubbling off each other, but it is a term meant to, like, I'm trying to think of which one this comes out of. I think it's in the Secret Revelation of John, when Barbelo is the first thought. Barbelo is emanated away from the Father. And so, for some reason, the word emanation is a bad word, or it has been considered to be a bad word for some Christians. But it's a word. I don't know that it means exactly what the definition that they've given it.
Well, James, let's back up and maybe talk about the beginning of the Gospel of Truth. I think interesting we were talking about the Gnostic myth and the Valentinians. I remember you mentioned Simone Petremann's great book, A Separate God, and in it she says that she makes an argument that the secret John comes after the Valentinian myth. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's certainly a compelling argument, so I thought I'd put that out with the audience. And also for the audience, James just doesn't give us these great translation. He puts a summary, he gives us different parts of what scholars think, so you'll get a good overview of these Gospels. But what I want to talk about is the central theology of the Gospel of Truth, a very poetic work. So many people come to me, different denominations, Christians and Jews, and they say, I just love this. It's you can feel, as you say, James, the passion and the faith of the author through it. He's not faking it or trying to be grandstanding. It's beautiful. But what I like is, let's talk about the concept of error. This is the theodicy, sort of the Gospel of Truth, and what I like is that you, like some other translators, refer to error as a woman. So we'll find out why. I hope people don't get defensive out there, but tell us about the idea of error in the Gospel of Truth and how it gets the whole of creation going, if you would.
Well, when I was reading Kendall and Kendrick Grobel's work, when he got to the word error, he felt that it was very highly personified, so highly personified that he actually bordered on wanting to call it the Demiurge and call it Yaldabaoth, another name for Yaldabaoth. However, he kind of stays there, and he doesn't take that next step and say, well, this is an early visualization of the Demiurge or Yaldabaoth in a Gnostic work. I did take the next step, and I'm going to tell you that I think error is another name for the Demiurge. And I think there's, here and there, the use of she and her is used in the translation and refers to error as she, and the she and error comes from her. And so, without using the word Sophia, or even, I think the word wisdom is used, but I don't think the word Sophia is used. But it's clear that she and her could mean, at least to me, I felt like we're talking about wisdom here. And so, very understated, no direct statement that this is wisdom and Sophia. but I say it is, and I don't know why. Well, maybe it makes sense in that if this was written by Valentinus,
we weren't there, so no matter which way you say it, it's right.
Valentinus. Here's a guy that's going to be elected Pope. So, I think one of the reasons why the Gospel of Truth is so beautiful is everything is understated, but it's still there. So, wisdom is part and parcel of creation. I mean, we have Proverbs 8, the great Proverbs 8, where wisdom is all over the place. And in Greek, of course, the word is Sophia. So she's called she, and she's called her, and she's all over the place. And clearly, it's before what we consider the universe is formed, and she's working with God to put together this local cosmos, and called wisdom everywhere. And of course, in Greek, she's called Sophia, and she comes over into at least to others as Sophia, and becomes, as David Hart says, she is a divinity. This is a great Orthodox scholar, in my opinion. I think David Hart is the Erasmus. Did I say that right? Yes. Erasmus for today, because he's translated the New Testament. He's Orthodox Greek Christian, but an academic and a scholar. He's not a pastor. He makes a point of that. I don't know why, but he's a great translator because he goes into another thing we can talk about a little bit later. But he goes into the words that are big in Gnosticism, which is Eon and Eons.
Yeah, we definitely want to, but I still want to focus more on error, and then we can get on some of the saga. So the audience knows well, because I find it fascinating. It's a cosmology of the gospel of truth beyond the poetry and this beautiful narration of redemption and grace. But error comes into the world, and I agree with you. I think she's a Sophia figure, but she comes into the world, or she gains power because God is so vast, people don't, or souls don't see God, and suddenly they sort of feed the darkness with their ignorance and give power to error. Or how do you see it, James?
Well, I think the translation suggests that before we find God, or before we have an experiential reckoning with God, or we come to believe in God, or have faith in God, or trust God, before that time, life is scary, and the older you get, it seems scarier and more meaningless and more difficult. And so part of the gospel of truth is finding the Father, that one of the favorite terms for God in the gospel of truth. And so once you find the perfect Father, you lose, life begins to make sense. And as we say, everything, there's a meaning to everything. There's a meaning to my meeting you, and you meeting me, and our talking on the phone right now. And so with that comes other things. Excuse me. And so if you don't find that, which is in the gospel of truth and is in the other gospels and in the Old Testament literature too, if you don't have that, then life's pretty scary. Now, I guess when people grow up entirely, sometimes they become comfortable with no belief, but even with belief, life is filled with anxiety and fear, and can seem at times meaningless, dark, and obscure. And because of that, this being that wisdom brings about, I'm looking at my third verse, thank goodness. I do have wisdom in there, the word wisdom. So, wisdom, as we know, it's not all of the theology of that we find in the Gospel of John is brought out here, but wisdom brings about error. That's pretty close. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And error is a being, and this error is a very strong, powerful divinity itself, small god, very much like Yaldabaoth or Yaldabaoth, without using the name, and so people turn towards error, and error can the way it's put down here is it can be presented. People can be presented with all sorts of different types of philosophies and teachings, and these sometimes are not true. They're lies, they're half-truths, they're untruths, but they're so beautiful and seductive that many will take them as a proxy for the real truth. And I call this, I take this one step further than I've seen anybody else do it, the counterfeit false spirit. So this all comes about because wisdom on her own brings about error. Now, it's not as clear that she brought error about to show the other gods or the other eons above that she was very capable in producing more like their kind, but she is responsible for bringing error about. So that's part of what I would say. It moves people away from the true source, the true root, which is the Father, and which is God Most High.
Very true, and in like these Gnostic sagas, there is the result beyond the restoration of wisdom is the assistance of the Logos, and the Logos coming down to earth to open people's eyes to the truth and get them back to the Father. So this brings me to back to David Hart, James, and
yes.
Maybe you want to talk about how he sees Aeons, but I love very much how you quote him saying that to understand the Logos, which is hard for people to do, to get their minds around it, relate the Logos to the Tao.
Yeah, I bought his book, his new translation of the New Testament, and at one point he wanted to make a point. David Hart, Dr. David Hart, wanted to make a point about periods of time, and so he talked about Eon and Eons at that point in his book, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But one of the things he talked about too was what the word logos meant, because as he says, John the seer didn't write down in the beginning was the word. He didn't say it that way. That's our English translation, and now he says that's a nice translation. It's a good translation, but he doesn't think it tells us the full extent of what John was trying to say when he used the word logos or logos. I've heard that said a few ways. I've always said logos, but
I just say logos.
So he goes into what the logos meant at the time of Jesus. And so he quotes extensively from Philo of Alexandria, the great Jewish scholar. By the way, Philo's brother, who lived in Alexandria too and was a businessman, was the richest man, I think, in the world at the time almost. Maybe a Roman emperor would have beat him out. But when his wealth was compared to people today, they compare it to they compare it to Bill Gates and people of that level. So that was good for Philo because Philo's brother loved him, and Philo didn't have to worry about a thing. So
could work on philosophy.
So that was it. Philo studied Greek philosophy to the nth degree. He was a highly, highly educated man for his time. Plus, he was a very devout Jewish man, and he knew the scriptures backwards and forwards. And so he comes up with his definition for the Logos, and David Hart brings this out, how it does mean the word, but also means so many other things. It means rationality. It means to write. It means to do. It means to live. It means to grow. It means to educate. It means to build. It goes on so far, and these definitions that David Hart has laid his eyes on and looked directly at, and he is completely Greek-speaking, and he makes a point, too, that he's not just any Greek reader and speaker. I think he's trying to let the Protestants know what's what. He says he also has read all of the Greek classics. So he just doesn't know New Testament Greek, but he knows all the nuances of Greek that come from reading all of the body of classic Greek literature, including his complete training in Greek regarding Christianity and as a Greek Orthodox scholar. And lucky for us, he speaks English, and he's very sure of himself. And so to him, the word is wonderful because it meant all these things to anybody who was trained in, anybody who had training like Clement of Alexandria or Origen. This is what that word meant to them. And so he said the only word that he could find that would come close to what the word Logos means is the Tao. And I'm saying that right, aren't I? The Tao.
Yes.
Now the Tao is the way, and I've seen some translations of the Tao. I've read the Tao a number of times. I read some books that say they're the Tao or part of the Tao, and so I've seen that it is also talks about it being a way of life. This is the way this is the way things are with birds. This is the way things are with human beings. This is the way a human being should treat a person who is an aristocrat. And here's how a person should be if they're a wife. And here's what you should be if you're a worker at a trade. And here's what you should do for your ancestors after they pass away, and on and on and on and on. So that's why he put those. That's why he said to him, the Tao has this hugely expansive description of things and meanings, and so he says of the Logos too. And what is really especially interesting to me is that makes the Logos, I don't know, it just makes it more universal. It's not that I'm against just saying Jesus Christ is the Savior and so forth and so on, but the Logos takes into account the Father. The Logos takes into account God. The Logos takes into account demons. So the Logos takes into account the religious life. The Logos takes into account normal life and life that is difficult. And it's the way. and it can show you the truth and so forth.
Yeah, some have
So
said you could even call it the Force. I think George Lucas based the Force on the Tao. So,
did he?
If people want a point of relation, that's another one.
Yeah.
What about the idea of the Aeons? I mean, I think it's a confusing term because an Aeon is more than one meaning, especially when you look at the Mendeans and their idea of the Uthras. An Aeon is both a consciousness, a period of time, and a place. Like in these Gnostic Gospels, there's an Aeon within an Aeon and everything. So how does David Hart or you see the Aeons?
Well, you're really very good at interviewing. I got to tell you, I just feel very blessed to be interviewed by you, because otherwise it would be much more difficult. But
Oh no, I enjoy the subject. It's, like we were talking, model trains. You and I like ancient texts.
Yes. Well, David Hart brings us up because I think he thinks it's extraordinarily important, and it has become just recently extraordinarily important. And I think it's a big deal. A big deal is going on right now in Christianity. Everybody's in Christianity as a whole, and there are a lot of people who are kind of upset because what he says is this. He says that the word in Greek, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's A-I-O-N. The letters A-I-O-N, Aeon.
Ion. There's no right or wrong way because we weren't there.
Yeah, the Greek that gets translated into our English as Eon is actually spelled in Greek A-I-O-N. That's however that's translated. I'm sorry. However that's spoken in Greek, I think it's Aeon, but I'm not quite sure. But it means the same thing. And so, first and foremost, he makes a point that it's a finite period of time. And he thinks this is really important for Christians to understand because of all stripes, because so many people think that eons and eons means eternity, and it doesn't. It means a long time and a long time and a long time. So it may be a very long time, but it's not eternity. And then when you take the next word, eons, and I'm going to try and get around to everything you were talking about, but the next one, Aeonios in Greek, and that's probably wrong, but it's Aiononis, Aeonios, or OS. People can look it up, but it is the equivalent to eons. Instead of eon, it's eons. And so if you're saying eons and eons and eons, even if you're saying eons and eons and eons and eons and eons, it's still a finite period of time. And in fact, what he says is that in the Gospels and in the New Testament, Greek, I think it's essentially true, but brought up less in the Old Testament in Greek, the Septuagint. But in the New Testament, there's rarely a time when hell is described as eternal. But if a word is associated with eon or eons, often it is translated as damned eternally, or gone to hell forever, or it will burn in the fire endlessly, and all that type of stuff does not exist. Most of the time it'll be a temporary burning, it'll be temporary suffering in darkness.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Buddhist concept of hell or even purgatory, where you just burn off whatever negative is within you or outside of you.
Yeah, and so that was the first and foremost thing he wanted to say. And he also, strangely, it does sound like purgatory, because he says for people, they will be purified, and after they're purified for an eon or eons and eons, they'll actually then be able to return to the eon of heaven or to heaven, first level of heaven, second level of heaven. I'm not quite sure which, but only a small number in the Gnostic literature end up actually eternally lost in some form of hell. That is in the Gnostic literature, and that is in the typical non-Gnostic Christian literature too. But that's for a very small number. I mean, most of us probably agree that Hitler and deserves eons and eons and eons and eons and eons. And then there's quite a few verses where it also says unto destruction. So maybe he'll suffer for a terribly, terribly, terribly long period of time, and then he'll be annihilated. Now that seems maybe a little bit unfair, but Stalin would be another candidate for a person that, in my opinion, would I can't imagine he'd have only one eon of suffering and then pop up there. Sorry for killing 50 million people.
Yeah,
but,
whoopsie. But James, I think we probably should move on very soon to the secret book of John while we have time. So we get the climax of the Gospel of Truth, and listener, just get his book and you'll really understand this grand saga. But in the Gospel of Truth, you've got Jesus is nailed to a tree, and he basically becomes the tree of knowledge. So quickly tell us, how did the Valentinus view the crucifixion of Jesus, the logos that appears in our material world of error?
Well, it appears that error is bothered by Jesus' message, and so he tries to prevent Jesus from bringing knowledge of the Father, knowledge of salvation, knowledge of divine salvational knowledge, as I call gnosis or Gnostic understanding. And so to stop that from being given to people, he has him nailed to a tree, and he dies on the tree. But when he dies on the tree, he becomes the fruit of the gospel. He becomes the fruit of the scripture. So by his dying on the tree, which is really the cross. Oftentimes, I mean, Paul himself in one of his letters called it hung on a tree. So that word and the cross are sometimes used to mean each other. And so I actually put the word cross in there. I can't remember if it's actually in there or not. Well, and because it seems to me that what they're saying is, or what was they were attempting to say, either Valentinus or Valentinians, was that because he died, and they don't come right out and talk about the resurrection, but I think they're suggesting in a way that because he died and what came after that, and I think they mean by that the resurrection, he becomes, everything that he said and did is remembered. It becomes, incredibly important, and it's important for everybody to get together and remember what he said and write it down. And so his death becomes the fruit of the scripture of Christianity, and that scripture of Christianity is also the skeleton upon which Gnostic scripture lies too. So both things are given birth out of that, and so his death means life for many. So that's in the Gospel of Truth, and so he died, but his scripture, which teaches the way to live, to love other people, to care about other people, and so forth, that comes from his death. Otherwise, he might have died as just one other failed Messiah, as so many others before him had. At least that's how I interpret that material.
Well said, and yes, it's a beautiful gospel. It ends I keep saying it poetically, but it's very inspirational. Sometimes I love to pray some of the words towards the end about don't let the devil in your heart and all that. But at the end, we could talk about this for many aeons and aeons and aeons, but we should probably give the Sethians their due too. They're in the corner going, hey, what about us? We're the surly Sethians. What about our text, the secret book of John? So let's talk about that in our second part of our interview. First, in regard to the Gospel of Truth, or moving forward to the Sethians in the secret book of John. Vance, do you have a question for James?
On the secret book of John, or are we done with the Gospel of Truth?
We're done with the Gospel of Truth, either backwards or forward, whatever you'd like to go.
Oh, I did have a couple of questions. I'll limit them, though. Did you do anything in your translation, James, about the negative opinion of beauty? Or did you pretty much leave that the way it was in the Gospel of Truth?
The negative opinion of beauty. I can't write at the moment. Do you have it right in front of you to bring up the lines? Because it's.
I don't have your translation. I have the Barnstone and Meyer translation in front of me. Can
you read a little part of it for me?
I sure will.
Because I must have translated it in another way.
Okay, it says, but she worked her material, this is error, she worked on her material substance vainly because she did not know the truth. She assumed a fashioned figure while she was preparing in power and in beauty, the substitute for truth. So it's saying that beauty is a substitute.
Okay, so here we're talking about Sophia, and she's working on she's working with matter, material, and so forth, to fashion a substitute for God, a substitute for the Father. So she's trying to make a high Eon and show everybody above her, including the Father, who sometimes is her consort, or she sometimes is consort, she sometimes appears to be a lower Sophia and independent and not a consort and so forth. But nevertheless, this is talking about Sophia fashioning Yaldabaoth. She's taking the materials and she has reproductive ability. She has the ability of a god, with a small g in this case. And I think there's a writer right now, Michael Heiser, who's talking a lot about the divine counsel, which really comes from the Old Testament, and it's in the New Testament too, but it's something we should take a second look at. So she's acting with her powers as a goddess with a small g, but still that is tremendous power compared to a normal human being, a mortal human being. And she develops a substitute for beauty, so the Father and His Word, and that's beautiful. But he may look beautiful, Yaldabaoth. He may be, of course, Yaldabaoth is transmorgified into Satan later on by the Cathars. They just don't beat around the bush. They just say he's Satan. Satan was known to be beautiful as a male, a beautiful male. You know, maybe he had a six-pack and big muscles, and good-looking guy, tall, and also he had great power. Because Sophia had great power, he had great power, although not like the Father, Mother, or the Son. And so he's a substitute for the beauty of the Father, but he's a false figure, and that's what I think that verse is talking about. So,
so the figure
does
is
that make
the
sense?
substitute for truth. Yeah, the figure is the substitute for truth, and not beauty is the substitute for truth. Or maybe
his read the verse to me again, because the beauty. Just read me the verse again.
Yeah, she assumed a fashioned figure while she was preparing, in power and in beauty, the substitute for truth.
Yeah, she makes Yaldabaoth, and he appears beautiful, and he is a god of the earth, like Paul's the god of this earth. He's that powerful, and he can speak, and what he seems to say is the truth, and but in fact it's not the truth, and it's half truths, it's lies. Despite the fact that he appears beautiful, he's really ugly. He's a monster, in fact, and so that's what I know exactly what you're talking about. I translated it a little bit differently. I don't have it right in front of me, and I don't have my whole secret revelation of John memorized, but that's what that is talking about. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, it does. I think I misread it. I read it a different way. So, okay, Miguel, I think that's it. Let's move on to the next one.
All right. Do you have a question for Secret John while we got a rhythm going here? Or the Sethians?
Oh, yeah, the Sethians. James, the Sethians, would you call them Christian? Because, from what I've learned about them so far, it's almost like a lot of the things about Jesus got tacked on to the Sethians, and they were even more hooked up to John the Baptist as opposed to Jesus. But, what's your view on that?
Well, I must admit I'm not a Sethian scholar, but they are a interesting, mysterious group of people, are they not? Where did they come from? And the books they left us with. I mean,
you could just say they came from aliens. That always gets us out of any sort of argument.
Ancient alien theorists. Say yes.
They were in the History Channel.
They show up. I've read some things about people think that they were a Jewish sect that was a variant Jewish sect. That was moving towards Gnosticism, and they were heavily into baptism, and they hooked up with other baptizers, which was the burgeoning Christian church, and hooked up with them, and then kind of took on Christianity for a while. And they were highly creative. I mean, the number of books that they wrote. Certainly, it seems to me that whoever these Sethians were, I mean, of course, we're talking about people that are supposed to have secret teachings from the third son of Adam, who was a righteous man. And so Sethians were supposed to have had some teachings before they came into contact with the Christians. I mean, literally, or if you want to take it literally, they were righteous people prior to coming into contact with the Christians. And then for some reason, they hooked up with them for a while. And I know from what I've read that they did live cheek by jowl with the normal Christians. And when they were asked what they were, they said, I'm a Christian. They didn't say, I'm a Sethian Christian. And wait till I show you the secret or the Apocryphal of John or the secret revelation of John. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah, we have a couple of exceptions. I think Marcelina and then a couple others of exceptions of these groups calling themselves Gnostics. But yeah, 99% of the time they call themselves Christians.
Yeah, there are some exceptions. you're right. And the Ophites, I think, later on. We don't want to talk about the Ophites.
Oh, that's a whole. We've done complete shows on them and the Nessenes and all that. But it is interesting. Speaking of the Ophites, I don't know. Would you say Secret John is as John Turner, and may he rest in peace? He passed away last year in the fall.
Really?
A great mind, yes. But he posited that Secret John might be a sort of a mishmash, that the creation story of Barbelo and the invisible spirit is the Sethian. And then when you get to the Garden of Eden and Yaldabaoth and the rebellion of man, that's sort of the Ophites. Do you see that, or do you think it's one harmonious text? And of course, Stephen Davis has said it might have been non-Christian, and then later on, Christians added the beginning with Jesus and the Apostle John talking and all that.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings at this point in time about whether it was pre-Christian or not. I tend to think it was not pre-Christian. So it might have started off. I mean, sometimes there are changes that are jarring in the secret revelation of John. And of course, it starts off with a biblical story of John meeting the rabbi who tells him Jesus has led him astray, and he's doesn't even know his own people and their history and so forth. And so John goes up to the mountain. He's upset. And he comes out. It's all very biblical. And then Jesus comes in a vision, and it's, behold, he's a child, and then behold, he's a teenager, and behold, he's an old man. It's really quite beautiful.
Yeah, and he's the mother too. I always liked it. The Sethians, the supreme reality was what? Father, mother, and child. And Jesus encompasses that.
Yeah, he is, well, you could almost say that Barbelo takes into account everything. Well, first you have God, and you have the Monad, who's the one good God, and that's an important thing for I think for Gnostics to remember, that the concept of the one God, even though there's Yaldabaoth, the god of earth and so forth, the one God is the good God, the Platonic good God. He doesn't have much to do with the riffraff of the universe and so forth, but he brings about the Father, and the Father is a loving figure, as it's brought out in the Gospel of Truth. And then there's the Mother, which is also the Holy Spirit, and she too is Sophia, higher Sophia, the greater Sophia, whatever you want to call her. And then there's the Son. So you have the Father, the Mother, and the Son. You have this Trinity constantly being brought up. But you also have God, and you have the Father, and when you put those all together, then you have Barbelo, and Barbelo. I'm not saying I'm giving a definitive definition of Barbelo here, but Barbelo always takes into account God, the Father, the Mother, and the Son. And so Barbelo although Barbelo mostly shows up as a she and as a her, and mostly in the feminine guise of the Holy Spirit or the Holy Mother, nevertheless, there's elements of her that are masculine, that are brought out. The Virgin, thrice male virgin, or thrice powerful male. There are masculine characteristics, and to me, Barbelo is kind of a way of stating that God is not just a man, which is in our normal canonical scripture. God is not just a man, and he's not just a woman, and he's not just a father, and he's not just a mother. He's more. And so for me, the word Barbelo, which is kind of our secret word, because other Christians look at it. I know what I felt like the first time I looked at it. Barbelo, what the heck is that? But Barbelo takes
I
into
had thought
account...
of Barbarella with Jane Fonda. I don't know why.
Yeah, me too.
The way I'm pronouncing it, probably. But anyway, so that's kind of my conception of Barbelo. I know there's many scholars that have said, I think it's this, I think it's that. There, L is in there, Bar, the sun is in there. And I think it's been called maybe God in four. I think it was by William Barnstone, and he interpreted that as being Yahweh, YHWH. Is that right? Yeah. So there's a lot of definitions around it, but the most easy concept for me to grasp is that Barbelo takes into account God, which is the good God above all, and kind of above it all and above the fray, but good. And therefore the universe is good. Even though there may be this local cosmos where the earth is, where things are bad, overall it's good. This is the way I interpret it, and I don't expect everybody to accept that and interpret it that way, but that's how I see it. And it takes into account all these other figures. And of course the mother in the Gnosticism, mother or Holy Mother means Holy Spirit, and may be derived from the Jewish term for the Spirit of Holiness, which is gendered as feminine. And there's also what's behind, I believe, I may say this wrong, but the Shekinah. Is that the right word?
I say Shekinah, but again,
Shekinah,
I don't think there's
Shekinah.
a right or wrong way to say it.
So that's
Shakira
kind of
in the Super Bowl? Is that what you're thinking, Vance?
No, I'm sorry. You say Shekinah, and I say Shekinah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my, because as I was translating and putting it down over and over again, there would be this association of Barbelo with these other figures. And so it was almost shorthand for maybe for people at that time who didn't have a computer that has 3/4 of all the world's knowledge in it at their fingertips, and they were being given a way to understand that God is so much more. God is so much more than a father or a man or a woman, a goddess, or any one thing. And so Barbelo, for me, kind of takes that into account. However, it's a slightly shocking word, because I've never come across it anywhere except in Gnostic literature. So it's maybe a unique word from the Sethians. And it sure seems that the heresiologist Irenaeus mentions significantly or talks about the Barbelolites and people that he appears to consider worship Barbelo. At least that's, I may not have that quite right, but that was the feeling I got, that they felt that some sects of Gnosticism were completely devoted to Barbelo.
All right. Well, like I said, I really enjoyed the translations. I think it's worth it. So, audience, if you're interested in these texts, this is a good place to go, because James, again, there's a way he makes them a little bit more Christian. They're more approachable, and in many ways the translations are more accessible, as he says, than some of the other ones, and some of them are straightforward. And his commentary I enjoyed too, because it's a great refresher into understanding these Gnostic texts. So, James, really appreciate you creating truth. What is truth? I think anybody interested in Gnosticism or early Christianity will benefit greatly from your translations, and I really appreciate you coming on Aeon by Gnostic Radio and sharing your work with us.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored, Miguel.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. The first part of our interview with James Brantingham. You thought Yaldabaoth was bad and Sophia was majestic. Well, now you get to see them both joined in the aspect of the Valentinian error. In our second part, we'll certainly unpack more about the figure of error. We'll shift to the secret book of Juan, from its soteriology to its history to its cosmology. James will tell us more about Barbelo, the Supreme Mother, as well as a lot about Yaldabaoth, including what his name might really mean. James will then insert the work of Dean Radin to give perspective to the visionary works of the Gnostics. Then move on to who were the Sethians and what exactly is a counterfeit spirit. We'll finally get into the Gospel of Mary from many perspectives, including its central theology of what exactly is sin. And much, much more. More than an hour more. I recommend you also listen to past shows on these works or get my books, Voices of Gnosticism and Other Voices of Gnosticism, where lauded historians and the very translators of the Nag Hammadi library lay it all down concerning the Gnostics. Regardless, please become an AB Prime member or patron at Patreon for the full dope. It really helps grow this Red Pill cafeteria. Only $6.99 a lunar cycle. You won't find this Gnostic content anywhere else in cyberspace or meat space. Membership includes full access to the archives with more than 13 years of high-quality interviews, and full episodes of my vlog, The Abraxas Brief. You'll also get an invitation to the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group and the Discord channel. Even support in the form of some shekels to PayPal or the US mail really, really helps. I do have an Amazon wish list if you want to keep that in mind. Regardless, I can't do it without you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true, authentic self. Hello and goodbye as always.